on, the biggest and the best, the one guy who knows the Lightning better than anybody, the one and only Erik Erlendsson, lightninginsider.com. What's going on, brother?
I'm good. Hey, I still love the passion from you, man. That's just awesome stuff. And what I've always loved about working with you and coming on and doing these conversations with you is like they're not hot takes, right? Like it's just good conversation, and I love it.
Yeah, thank you, buddy. And you know, it's funny too, and this is a great example as well. When Erik first started really coming on a regular basis after, because you did some stuff with the big dog over the years, but when you started coming on a regular basis, it was when Ron and Ian had you on every Wednesday at 1:00. And as much as it was about hockey, it was also about music. And Ron being such a big music guy. And listen, Ron's a very particular guy, and he'll tell you that himself. Ron, there's no gray area with Ronnie D. He either loves you or he doesn't care. He doesn't hate. He just doesn't care. It doesn't infiltrate his headspace. It's just not him. And Ronnie D loved Erik Erlendsson. Loved talking to him about music. Erik would bring in some weird Swedish band or Norwegian band or Icelandic group, and Ron would be fascinated. And his big deal, Ronnie D's big deal was, I have to stump Double E today. And, you know, people every single week would tune in and they would guess the songs and they would love it. But none of that stuff was ever hot take. None of that stuff was even old school Ron and Ian where it was like inappropriate stuff. Like that was just good talk about music and hockey. And I just don't think that there's a reason why stuff like that shouldn't still be around, right? We should be able to have a good conversation about hockey for 20 minutes every Wednesday and not bore people. I mean, we're not sitting here talking about X's and O's. I mean, Erik, now we're talking about a team on a 6-game winning streak, the most exciting team probably in the NHL and one of the best in all of sports, but there just seems to be right now. I mean, it's easier to talk about them when they're doing well, but this team right now, they seem to really be finding their groove. I was worried a little bit after, before the break, because, you win 4 in a row, but now winning 2 straight since they've returned from the 4 Nations, you got to be feeling good about the Bolts.
Yep, absolutely. First of all, I love the day that I got Yngve Malmstrom from Ronnie D. I still remember his reaction, is throwing his hands up and going, "How did you get that one?"
That's great.
Yeah, look, it's crazy what a month difference can make. And I know there's a 2-week gap where there were no games. So for them to be, like, I just looked it up, they lost that game to Chicago coming back from that 14-24 stretch they had. And they were actually sitting outside of a playoff spot. Right? And it was tight. It was close. They had games in hand and all that other stuff. But, they were kind of in a precarious position. Right. And we were wondering, well, can they get it together? And, I was getting lots of flack from people outside just telling me that the team sucked and they were not going to do anything. And, as I tend to do, I tried to take a bigger picture and say, look, if you want to look, and advanced numbers are advanced numbers and stats are stats and everything else. But if you looked at what the numbers were suggesting and you match that up with the eye test, they did deserve to have a better situation than their record shows. And, and wow, record is record and this team is going nowhere. I was like, no, just let it play out a little bit. Don't overreact to a little bit of a bad stretch. And January was a difficult stretch, big time difficult stretch. And it's not an excuse, but it is reality. It's like, just let's calm the waters a little bit and let's see what happens. The 2 games against Ottawa was everything. If they'd have lost those 2 games, who knows what we would be discussing today right now. But they didn't. They dug their heels in. They committed themselves to playing a more consistent style of hockey, taking risk out of their game. And the best comment that John Cooper said last night after the game was, they're now letting the game come to them. Right. They're not forcing things. They're not trying to. And I love the comment from Ryan McDonough after that Chicago game. Nobody can go rogue right now, right? We all have to make sure we find our way through this, and they have. And, they've put themselves in a much better position. They're playing much better defensively. We're not talking as much about turnovers. The scoring drought that a lot of these players were going through that they count on to score are coming through. I mean, Brandon Hagel's been on a tear during the 6-game winning streak. Nikita Kucherov just continues to munch points, and they're getting depth scoring, right? I think it's 6 straight games now you've gotten a 4th-line goal. That's not a coincidence in a lot of this. So they found a way to calm their waters and get their game on track a little bit without tweaking too much of system and anything else that they could have done over the break, even with players away. So they're just playing winning style of hockey, and the wins are coming.
And I saw you mention this last night. I want to ask you about it now. Is Andrei Vasilevskiy somehow flying under the radar this year? It's such a weird question for me to pose, but nobody has made more saves in the National Hockey League than Andrei Vasilevskiy this year, with over 1,150 saves. You look at the save percentage, you look at the goals against. I mean, he's top 10 in both of them, and it just seems like he's getting better and better and better. I mean, you're playing the Edmonton Oilers, you're only giving up 1 goal. That says a lot when you're going up against Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and company. I just feel like for some reason, the big cat is just kind of, in the background, but he's probably playing the best of any goalie right now, maybe outside of Connor Hellebuyck.
Agreed. Right. And like the number I always look at is the save percentage. And, I talk to Chief a lot. I know you talk to Chief a lot. That's the number he looks at. Goals against is one thing. Goals against sometimes is more of a team stat than the save percentages. But like, how are they doing that? And you look up, he's 2nd in the league in save percentage. Right. He's .921, and he's had a good stretch. It's no coincidence that the two go hand in hand. When the goalie's playing well, the team usually gets the results, and he's always been the backbone of this team. And look, he had to steal a couple of games in Detroit and Montreal right before the break. I mean, they were clearly outplayed in both of those games, but they found a way to win, reverse karma, if you will, from some of those games earlier in January that they weren't winning when they were better. But yeah, he absolutely, he's not getting a lot of consideration for the season he's having, and that's fine. Like, he's not out there looking for people to say what a great year he's having. He just wants to go out and help his team win. And but you look at like last night, and this is like typical Andrei Vasilevskiy. He can wow you. He can make those wow saves, but he usually makes 1 or 2 stops in a game that make a difference, right? Like, there was a play last night where McDavid, one of the few times he found some space, he starts revving it up at that far blue line. You're like, uh-oh, what's about to happen here? And he got one of those plays, and he came in on the backhand, and Vazzy was ready for it. He tried to go far side with the backhand shot, and he was able to get it with his right shoulder and make that save. So it's not a highlight reel save, right? Because it's not athleticism that's showing through. He just makes solid, sound positional saves time and time again because he's that dialed in. And, he'll throw the glove behind the back on Anze Kopitar type save every now and then because he's capable of doing that. But he's just back to being, not that he ever left, but he was just he's more consistent in his play. Look, there were times earlier this year you're like, that's when we're not used to seeing him let in. He certainly hasn't been that case. And so I think because of the start the Lightning had, especially the January that the team had, in some of those moments that were there early in the year, people weren't talking as much about him, but quietly, he's right there. He's 4th in the league in goals against, and he's 2nd in save percentage. So, and I think he's tied for 2nd in wins.
What would it take for him to win the Vezina? It'd probably take Hellebuyck to kind of go on a little bit of a dip, and Vazzy keep playing at this level, you think, right?
Yeah, if we're going to talk winning, I'll be curious to see, because the general managers are the ones who vote on the Vezina, how the GMs vote this year. If everything kind of continues the way it's going with some of the top goaltenders, where he finishes, if he'll be back in a top 3 finalist situation. I don't think he's going to win it because Hellebuyck has had such a great season, and Hellebuck's going to get some MVP consideration. He's been that big of a difference for Winnipeg this year. But yeah, it would have to take Hellebuyck really going on to a slide and Winnipeg going on to a slide late in the year, and Vazzy to kind of continue what he's doing for that to happen.
Do you think this is the best Vazzy that we've seen in his career?
No.
That's scary, right?
It is. It absolutely is. You go back to boy, some of the other years. I mean, the 21 season, the COVID year. Everything that all the players were going through, and some of the numbers that he put up that year for the team. And but I mean, the best we've seen him. I would say the best was probably the 21 playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
You think of the couple of 1-0 clinchers, right? The game 7 against the Islanders here at Amalie Arena, and game 6 against the Canadians, and some of the stops that he made. That was when he was at his best. But this will be up there in terms of regular season performances. But as we know, it's all about the playoffs. How are you going to perform in the playoffs? And that's where it's going to be. That's ultimately where this team and goalies like him will ultimately be judged.
Do you think some of the forwards are playing better because of the chatter around this team needs more punch at the deadline? Because I feel like I'm looking around and I'm looking at some of these pieces going, are they playing better because of the noise? Like when you look at Gonsalves, you look at Gergensons, I feel like those guys have taken a step up in their play as of late.
Well, I think Gonsalves, being a young player, which he still is, when he came up, like he's an offensive player. And I think he put pressure on himself to be an offensive player, but he was in more of a third line, fourth line role sometimes, and that's not always a great fit. And then when he would get those opportunities, he would defer, right? Because you're playing with some of the greatest players in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would kind of back off. He wasn't shooting the puck. Like the confidence in an offensive game was just non-existent. It just wasn't there anymore. So they sent him back and told him, go get it back. Go be who you are down there, and we'll see where things go. And he's come back and he's been a different player. And so has that been from trade chatter, potential trade chatter? I think it's probably in the back of players' minds for those who do pay attention to what we say in the media and what's written and what's talked about in a lot of circles. But I think with him in particular, I think it's just a young player discovering who he is. I mean, even that pass he made last night, on Eyssimont goal. I mean, that's just a playmaker's play. Like he kind of curls it back. I think a guy like Gergensons wasn't being rewarded for his play. And, again, he's worthless. Why is he on this team? He's not scoring any points. Well, you're right. And, he was a guy that was sitting like -6 or -7 on a team with a +40, +50 goal differential. That kind of stands out. But that kind of tells you how good he has been playing, because he wasn't putting up points to even out that plus-minus number.
Right. Could have been worse.
Yeah, exactly. So he, I just think that he has played consistent for a good portion of the year. He just wasn't getting points to show for it. And, and same thing with a guy like Eyssimont. I think Eyssimont, remember, he started the year injured. He missed basically all of training camp with the injury. He's kind of back to being the pest and the disruptor that we know that he can be, and getting under guys' skin. So I think his game has just kind of come along as he's felt healthier and healthier. But I do think it might not be the reason that players like this start to kind of find a little bit of a different situation, but certainly it's probably in the back of their mind a little bit that, this chatter's out there. If I want to be a part of this, I need to step up my game.
I know we don't love hot takes or big time superlatives here on the show, but Brandon Hagel, what would you say about him? Is he the most underrated player in the game? Is he the most improved player in the game? I feel like there's a superlative that describes Brandon Hagel, and you are so much more articulate and loquacious than I am. Give me something for Brandon Hagel, because this dude is just, he's insane. He's unbelievable how good of a hockey player he's become.
Yeah. Well, you want to talk about some of the great trades that go down in franchise history. That's gonna sit up there among some of the top ones, because you sit back and you think, what in the world was Chicago thinking in trading him, right? And look, some of that is the persistence of Julien BriseBois. They identified him and did everything. I mean, look at what they gave up. What, a couple of first-round picks and a couple of former second-round picks and players in Kachuk and Radish, Taylor Radish, not Darren, in that trade. I think with the Four Nations and his fight with Matthew Tkachuk, obviously it caught everybody's attention and probably put his name on a lot of radars that didn't know who Brandon Hagel was. So he cast himself into the spotlight. But I think that little moment sort of identifies who Brandon Hagel is, and that's somebody who just plays with just pure emotion. And I think that emotion comes in every shift he plays. Like, it's just who he is. And one superlative, man, you put a writer on the spot to talk about something. It's a little bit more difficult than me sitting down and finding the right word as I go through my Microsoft Word document. I mean, that's the word that I think of when I think of Brandon Hagel is just emotion, right? Like, you see the way he celebrates goals. And, I go back again and I invite people to go read this story that's on the website that I wrote a couple years ago. Might have been early last year. He has a couple of tattoos on his arm, and they represent two of his uncles who committed suicide a year and 1 day apart. And it's kind of, he's such a big family person because of that. Mm-hmm. And he talked a lot about this being his hockey family and finding his hockey family here. So you understand, like, you kind of get in depth to find out who Brandon Hagel is when you read that, and when you hear him talk about it. He feels he's found a home, and he feels welcome, and he's a part of something. And players who play with that type of emotion sometimes need that insulation, for lack of a better term. And I think that's what Brandon Hagel has found here, and that's why he's thrived here.
Yeah, very well said. He spoke about that at the Sneaker Soiree this year, about losing those family members. And it was supposed to be a fun segment there with Ryan Pepio and Graham Barton. Sarah Walsh did a great job, and it took us back a little bit, like, whoa, and I knew the story. And it's wild. And you're right. I mean, I think when you have a team that's so strong emotionally, right, there's teams out there that put an onus on finding good players, but Julien BriseBois puts a priority on finding great human beings. Yeah. And when you have Brandon Hagel come in, and the two biggest things that stick out to me about guys that have come in via trade are him that first day when we interviewed him there, and him looking like a lost puppy, not knowing where to get his groceries. And then Nick Paul, when we did the Zoom call, when he was at the bus stop, and he was telling us that Steven Stamkos' wife has already reached out to his girlfriend. He wasn't even in the country yet, and he was already just blown away with the acceptance and the family camaraderie that they have for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And you bring up another guy in JJ Moser, and I was having this conversation with Ben Pierce yesterday. Eric, it's kind of odd that a guy that's missed 28 games, he's not a big time goal scorer. He's not a guy that has a bunch of big hits like we saw from Emil Lilleberg early on in his career. But the fans really, really like JJ Moser very early on in his tenure with the Bolts, and just so great to see him back out there playing with Victor Hedman. But what is it about this kid that people have really just grown so fondly of him very quickly?
I think it's the mustard colored suits. I mean, he showed up that in one of the preseason games. Obviously they take pictures and videos of the guys getting out of their cars in the compound and walking in, and that kind of jumped out at you right away. But I think it's just like, you've had conversations with JJ. He wants to engage with you, right? Like, he wants to kind of sit down and have a conversation. And so I think he just speaks, from his heart, and he speaks, with such a confidence level, or whatever it is. Like, he just engages, and he makes you want to talk to him. He makes himself a person who just wants to be a part of the conversation. And I remember early on, again, I think it might have been training camp or right at the start of the year, him and Connor Geekie are the last two guys sitting in the locker room, and we're just sitting there, and those two are kind of going back and forth about, should I get an Uber? Do I need to come pick you up? And Moser's like, dude, I'm trying to save you some money here. I'll come pick you up and we'll go to the airport together. Like it just genuine conversations. And I think maybe that's the best thing when you hear JJ talk is he is genuine. And then his game on the ice is just as genuine, right? He's not flashy. He's just steady. And he's been a pretty good partner with Victor Hedman, which, you know, for the most part, we've been talking about trying to find for, ever since Anton Strawman left. And, Darren Radis was in that spot, and I thought he played, well enough alongside Hetty. But, Moser's a top 4 guy and skates well, reads the play well. And I think when a player comes to a new organization and has the type of start that he had, and then you do miss him for 28 games, you realize what you're missing when he's out. And that's not to say that the guys didn't play, well enough on defense during his absence, but that's a long time to be without a player like that. And I think fans understand the importance of having him back.
Yeah, I'm glad you put it that way too, because in a weird way, I feel like the Lightning getting better and winning before he came back was nice, right? Because it was all right. You're ascending, you're playing better defensively, and then you get him. And John Cooper answered my question about him the other night like that. It was almost like making a midseason trade, bringing in a guy that's top 4 defenseman. Based on what we've seen and how this team has played the last couple of weeks, and seeing how specifically certain players have played, does that change your opinion on what they're going to do come deadline time? And also if guys like Geeky or Duke or Howard or any of these guys called up, does their recent 6-game winning streak change any of that? Or do you look at it as, hey, you're going to come back down to earth eventually. You're not going to win every game for the rest of the season. How does your outlook change after what you've seen the last 2-3 weeks?
Well, if I were to put on a management hat and, portray Julien BriseBois here, it shouldn't change anything. Mm-hmm. Right? Like if you thought that certain areas needed to be addressed before, and as much as players have stepped up, it probably hasn't changed the other areas on your roster, right? So I still think that they could use a middle 6 forward. I don't think that has changed, even though you're getting, a couple of goals from Glendening now, and Gergensons is finally on the board, and, Gonsalves has played well, especially in some, and a guy that's shown that he can step up and play, with a point of Kucherov, as he's done a couple of times since he's come back up. But I just think they need more consistent, guy who can kind of provide some offense in the middle. I was talking in the room the other night, I'm not starting a rumor. It's just me looking at a player going, what about a Tyler Toffoli? Right? Here's a guy who everywhere he goes, he just kind of scores goals, and he's out in San Jose. San Jose is not going anywhere. I don't know what his contract situation is or anything like that. I'm just, throwing speculation against the wall. A guy like that could be a really good fit in terms of what it is they're looking for a middle 6. And I still, like, if I was to put on that management hat, how comfortable would you be if you get into a playoff series and your third line defensive unit, whether it's Lilleberg and Perbix, Lilleberg and Radish, no matter who it is, are stuck out there in a shift against Austin Matthews? Right. Like, how comfortable are you that they could kind of, hold their own? And I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying that's the question you have to ask. Do you feel that you need somebody that can be more consistent in that situation? Because we know in a playoff series, that one shift can be the difference between going home and moving on.
Yeah, because you think of the years in the past, and you have like, oh yeah, you have Savard out there, or you have Sergachev or Coburn out there, like guys like that you trusted. Tyler Toffoli is $6 million per, and that's through the 27-28 season. So that would be
throw that out.
Yeah, so that's too much probably for a guy that's not necessarily a spring chicken either. He's 32, he's going to be 33. But that, even though that's not the right answer, a guy like that. And I want to throw a name at you that I like, and he's got some history with the Bolts. Not great, but this is a dude that brings size, he brings tenacity, and he's $5.5 million for the next 3 years, and that's Josh Anderson. Another guy, that type of player where he's a middle 6 guy, he's got a big right-handed shot, he's 30 years old, he's had playoff success, a little cheaper than Toffoli. We know the salary cap is going to go up the next couple of years. I think if it's not those two guys, it's that type of guy, right?
Right. Absolutely. It's a guy who can play second line if you need him, can play third line if you need him. And look, this team is built a little bit differently because, I mean, you saw it last night. Cirelli and Hagel are their matchup line, and no matter who else is on the wing, and happened to be Gergenson's last night. So your third line is not necessarily a typical checking line, right? Because it was Cirelli that was matched up against McDavid last night, and they used point line against Draisaitl when he wasn't playing with McDavid last night. So this gives you a lot of insight into the way John Cooper thinks and manages his lines. So it would ideally be somebody that could play on a second line who can check and provide some scoring, but also a guy who can kind of play third line and play with Nick Paul and maybe more of a grinding type of offensive type of line rather than a pure matchup line. So those are the type of players that she wants. Stephanie wants Brock Besser. Yeah, he's UFA and he's going to cost a lot of money at the end of the year. So
$6.65 million. Obviously, it's going to be prorated by the end of the season. So, as we've seen in the past, Julian's going to try to get somebody. He's dipped into that UFA every once in a while. We saw it with Duclair and Dumba, but the return on that was very low, right? If he's going to make a Brandon Hagel type deal where he's going to bring in a guy that's going to be a big part of this team or a big middle six and it's going to cost some assets, he's not going to trade a first or 2 firsts for a guy that doesn't have a year or 2 left after the deal, right?
Right. Yeah. And look, he's had to go into the UFA market a couple times. He's not big on it. He always likes contract term on guys, the Goodrows and the Colemans like he did a couple years ago, as opposed to the Savards and the Duclairs and those guys. But with the cap going up, maybe it does, change their thought process a little bit, because maybe you can afford to bring in somebody that maybe you couldn't have. And that's the good news about this salary or the trade deadline for the Lightning this year, which, by the way, is March 7th. So we're just a little over a week away from the trade deadline. They have cap space, right? They're not an LTI. They've been able to manage it as well as possible with some of the injuries. That's why they only carried 20 for a good stretch there when Moser was out, so they could accumulate as much cap space as possible. So I think the latest projections is, you could bring in a guy that's about a $6.5 million player at the trade deadline at the 7th, because again, the cap is accumulated on a daily basis. So you throw money into the pot every day until it's full. So they have some space that maybe they haven't had in years past, and it won't necessarily have to be a dollar in, dollar out type of situation if they wanted to go that route. So I think it's given Julien a little bit more flexibility in his approach than maybe he's had in the past couple of years.
I know another big name that has really been bandied about when it comes to the National Hockey League is Mikko Rantanen. He goes from Colorado to Carolina in that deal because Colorado didn't think that they were going to be able to come to terms with him. He is a guy, $9.25 million this year. And now there's talks about Carolina not being able to sign him and the Lightning being one of the teams that are interested in his services. What do you make of that whole thing, knowing that he is going to be a UFA after this year? And also another guy, and Stephanie brings it up, Alex Tuch. This is a guy that's got another year after this year. He's only $4.75 million. A guy that was highly touted, and people thought he was going to be the real deal when Minnesota brought him in. What do you make of Alex Tuch, and what do you make of Mikko Rantanen?
I think Mikko Rantanen is too big fish, too much of a big fish to go hunting after. Because you're not gonna be able to sign him, right? It would be a pure rental situation, and certainly he could find a home. In that top 6, that'd be something else. But yeah, you're not gonna be able to sign him because of the money he's looking for, and with the cap going up, now all of a sudden agents and everybody else, now it's not necessarily pure dollars. It's what percentage of the cap are you taking, and that's kind of how they base a lot of things, especially with the cap going up. So Rantanen, to me, is a pipe dream, but you never know with Julien. You never know what he's doing. He keeps everything so close to the vest that a lot of the insiders don't even know necessarily what's going on until right before it happens. So a guy like Tuch probably fits that mold that we just talked about, that middle 6 kind of guy that can play. I'd be interested if Buffalo's going to move him, because he has been one of the few guys who says he wants to be in Buffalo. He loves being in Buffalo. So, will they move him if he's one of the few guys that is totally committed, to trying to help that team turn things around a little bit? We'll see. It'll be interesting. And like I said, this is maybe a little more of a fun trade deadline approach that the Lightning have this year than years past, because there's more possibilities and more opportunities that maybe weren't there in previous years, that maybe you could bring in a player with a little bit more of an impact, than what they've had in the past. Because and look, the thing we've always learned with Julien is that he doesn't go big game hunting too much, right? He brings in the Savards, he brings in the Goodrows, the Colemans. I mean, Duclair, a good top 6 forward, but not a high end top 6 forward, right? So my guess is he'll probably go along those lines again. So like an Alex Tuck, like Robinson, guys like that.
All right, E, what do you got coming up? What do you have up on lightninginsider.com?
Hey, talking about last night's game, New Year's resolutions are made in January and forgotten about in February. The Lightning made their resolution in February so they could forget about their January. So that's kind of the theme of, the thought process going into last night's game. And I still have a story up about the guys in the locker room talking about Brandon Hagel and his impact at the Four Nations face-off, and kind of throwing himself into the national spotlight a little bit for especially a lot of Canadian fans who didn't think he deserved to be on that team, and what the teammates thought of him being a big part of that. So that's all up there. Obviously, it's another busy month of March. I think it's another 15 games in 29 days. Coming up in March for this team. The trade deadline, like I said, is a week from Friday, so I will keep an eye on that. So lots going on around Lightning Land, and a lot to be covered.
You got that right. Make sure you go check him out. Erik Erlendsson on Twitter /XK, not a C, 2 S's after the D, Erik_Erlendsson. Go to lightninginsider.com. Use that promo code JNZ, the 3 letters, JNZ. Get $10 off, not just this year, but every recurring season after that. Double E, appreciate your time, my man. See you tomorrow night at Emily.
All right, bud. Be well.
See you, buddy.